back with part 3 of Civil War in America. Who would win? In-depth analysis by Jon Marks. We are responding to this. Now, guys, I'll be placing parts 1 and 2. One of those will be in the description box, and part 2 will more than likely be in the comment section. We're actually leaving. The last place where we're at is military action, military desertions. We're going to go ahead and get right on the end of this part 3. It looks like we're going to try to get as close as we can to the end of this one right here, at least 11 to 12 minutes to the video before part 4 comes out on Saturday. And of course, I'll have an analysis video out on Sunday afternoon on Gear Issue 33 to speak about this. I'll also be advising this video to anybody and everybody who is subscribed to John Claymore, as well as you guys. I'll be leaving the link to that channel in the description box as well, where I talk about the social issues, the same social issues that, quite frankly, could actually lead to this event. Now, before we go any further, guys, make sure you guys hit that like button, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, so that way you guys will be notified when my next videos come out. Leave a comment in the comment section. Please critique the video. Also, we got to get this disclaimer right here, so that way YouTube is not demonetized. Well, it can't demonetize video because I'm not monetized yet. Need you guys' help on that one. But we need to go get this disclaimer out for YouTube. YouTube, this right here is not an advocacy for violence. This right here is just looking at a certain scenario that could possibly happen or has been spitballed before. We're looking at a video, and we're actually reviewing and reacting and responding to it. And we're also giving analysis on it. With that out of the way, guys, let's go ahead and get right into it.
Another factor here, let's talk about the former military people in the civilian population. Big advantage here to the right wing. There are many times more former military in the civilian population than there are active military, and the great majority of these former military are grassroots right wing and are heavily armed and are able to train others and have in-depth knowledge of how the military operates. So there's a big advantage to the right wing here. Military weaponry. Let's give the advantage to the establishment in the left, because obviously the military has advanced weaponry that the grassroots...
Now, really quick, we're gonna flip back over at the end of number 10. I want to talk about this former military action. It's not just ex-military guys. You got to think about something else. There are a lot of people out there who train a lot with their weapons that are not ex-military, but actually shoot just as good. I'm talking about guys who hunt. I'm talking about people who shoot for fun. I'm talking about former ex-law enforcement. I'm talking about guys who may have done maybe 3 or 4 years, maybe as an officer, as a cop, and then became a correctional officer and then quit the job. There are a lot of people out there who held these positions, not to mention conservative women. They also carry weapons too. They're also armed. Now, obviously, you're thinking to yourself, training is going to be an issue. They're not soldiers, but at the same time, you have a lot of military guys out there who would actually help take care of you in a situation like this, especially in a lot of communities. This is something that the left, especially the far left, always underestimates. Like I said in the last part, these people don't live in reality. Now, the thing that really bothers me, though, with this is that let's just say that the underestimation, and let's just go ahead and say this being out of touch and the lack of knowledge. Now, guys, there are other left-wing outlets that are beginning to try to educate their side on this. I have no idea. Well, I don't know if it's a warning or if it's trying to get them to get involved. But I'm just saying, for the sake of argument, there are people out here that would actually make the former military, which would probably be about, I don't know, maybe 1 to 3 million total of those who actually are of age. And also something else too. If you serve between the years of 2002 and 2010, guess what? You're more than likely a global war on terrorism veteran. So you've probably already been trained to fight an insurgency. If that right there is the case, then you're probably already going to know what type of military tactics would be used against you. Now, as I've said before, this scenario right here has got a 99.9% probability of it coming from the left, not the right. I want to go ahead and get that out of the way. I've said that in each video, and you'll hear me harp on it more and more and more. And the biggest reason why I'm critiquing this one is because I'm working on my own project to show you guys how it actually go down. John has made a good video here, but he's not actually shows you how it would more than likely go down if it was to actually occur. Now, that rather being said, let's go ahead and get on to the next number here.
Right wing would not have, at least at the beginning. But again, their ability to use this would be somewhat limited or very limited because of the realities of fourth generation warfare. One other thing I hear from people sometimes is, what about secret military magic weapons? Well, even if they exist, who do you aim the weapon at? How do you tell the difference between a revolutionary and civilians who are just trying to protect themselves and survive? You can't do nukes, you can't do chemical weapons for PR reasons and practical reasons. It would kill more blue people than red people anyway. People say, well, there's swarms of drones. Okay, so how do you program a drone to tell the difference between a revolutionary and a civilian who's just trying to protect himself and his family? How do you program a drone to tell the difference between a group of revolutionaries and a group of regular civilians who are just banding together to try to protect themselves against roving gangs? How can a drone tell the difference? It's not like the revolutionaries are going to be wearing uniforms and going around advertising who they are. So any ability to use vastly superior weaponry or any super weapons, if they exist, would be dramatically hampered and limited by infrastructure problems, military defections, the nature of fourth generation warfare, and the limitation also of having to manage perceptions to the international community, where you're fighting against your own population and there's civilians, and revolutionaries could suffer losses and claim that they're civilians. You killed a bunch of civilians. You see the problem here.
Really quick, before we go any further, of course, we see 11 being nukes. This right here, I think, would be an advantage to the right because, and we'll get back to military weaponry here in a second, it's not just the practicality reasons. He's right. You're more than likely going to hit more blue people than red people because, I mean, think about it really quick. Do you really and truly want to wipe out the areas where your farm is at? Also, something else too. Now, by the way, that right there is just for nukes, all right? Now let's talk about actual air. Let's talk about actual air power using bombs on actual civilian targets. Okay, let's talk about this for a second. I made a video a while back after Biden threatened 2A supporters, and in that video I said, "Good luck dropping bombs on a bunch of farms." Okay, just good luck doing that. The reason why I said good luck doing that is because the only thing you're doing when you drop basic or even smart bombs onto an actual random field, the only thing that you are doing, and I want you to consider this. The only thing you're doing is giving the farmer a head start on his next crop. Okay, that's the one thing you're doing. Yeah, you may have taken out a crop, but the only thing you did in the process was help him replow his field. Yeah, there could be craters and whatnot, but trust me, people who live out in rural areas, people who just put it this way here. Country boy can't survive. Just go ahead and throw that out there. Small town people can't survive. As a matter of fact, small town people, they have to adjust to everything that goes wrong in the country first because we're normally like the last ones to actually get the product and the material. And of course, we've got to learn to actually adjust everything around that. As far as military weaponry is concerned, also other examples, LAVs, tanks, whatnot. I mean, yes, it's intimidating, but I mean, dude, I'm a prior service Marine who, by the way, was also an M1A1 Abrams tanker. There are ways around it. There are ways to actually render something, let's just say, immobile. So I don't think military weaponry is going to be as strong of I don't think it's going to be as strong of a target as you think. Also, one more thing too. If a situation like a civil war in the United States broke out, possible foreign intervention is possible. So how do you defend yourself and also defend a certain side within a country, and then to go on top of it, defend your country from all of the enemies while at the same time defending the rest of the world? Remember, the United States, we've got a lot of bases around the world. And as I've said before, most active duty forces, especially the Marines, they would be sent more than likely to these installations to protect assets. We will get back to that there here in a second. So they're more than likely not going to use specialty weapons on their own. I just figured I'd go ahead and throw that out there. I think John is 100% correct about that. And most guys who, quite frankly, were in the military would probably agree with that. Of course, you may get a here and there dissenter who may make a good point, but for the most part, I don't see them using nukes on their own population. Let's just go ahead and throw that out there.
Nukes. I'm going to call it a tie. In my opinion, it's unlikely that nukes will come into play. The establishment left would be very unlikely to use it on their own population because that would advertise we're such an illegitimate government that we have to nuke our own people to maintain control. And
now, really quick, I got to disagree with one thing. They don't care if they're illegitimate. Okay, they don't care if they're illegitimate. They wouldn't want to nuke their own population unless I mean, I just don't see them nuking their own population. But it's not going to be because they don't want people to view them as illegitimate. Trust me, the left in this country does not care of how they look right now.
Even if they wanted to drop a nuke, where would they drop it where it doesn't kill more blue people than red people? Because the blue people are more crowded together than the red people. And every major city has blue people right in the center of it. The right wing might drop one on D.C. or New York or L.A. or San Francisco if they had the chance. But again, I think it's highly unlikely because it would turn international opinion against the grassroots right way too much, and it would probably be totally unnecessary, given how easy it is for them to disrupt infrastructure and create chaos that way. So let's call nukes a tie. All right, let's go to the next factor that this former Red Team planner talks about here. Taking America in a land war is almost impossible. The U.S. has way too many choke points, and the government forces would often be on the wrong side of them. This ties into the logistical nightmare, but it also has to do with an odd phenomena, which is that liberals like to live near the ocean. Many of the dividers of the country, like the Rocky Mountains, the Mississippi River, Appalachia, the Missouri River, are red state areas. And of course, air travel is a thing, but a majority of the U.S. government's needs would have to travel by ground. And even still, many of the major airports are outside of the city. And of course, the U.S. would use military base airfields, but if civil war did break out, which bases would be safe? Which ones would have fallen to the deserters? The United States is absolutely full of natural terrain choke points, making marching an army across it against armed resistance almost impossible. And it's large enough that no sustained air campaign would be possible. The Japanese Admiralty realized this themselves during World War II, which is why many of them were against attempting to invade. Also, by an interesting coincidence, most of those choke points are in hard conservative states where the resistance would be strongest. The government would lack the ability to reclaim its own land by force, especially when the previous point about infrastructure is taken into account. President Lincoln, on the matter of potential European involvement in the First American Civil War, stated, "All the armies of Europe with Bonaparte as a commander could not take a drink from the Ohio." So I'll add my commentary to this, which is simply that the center of the United States, the red area of the country, flyover country, is totally self-sufficient in every way when it comes to the basic needs of life. They literally need no one else. They don't need international supplies of anything. They don't need the coasts at all. They can supply their own food, all their basic needs they have available to them. The coast, the blue areas, are heavily reliant on the center in that regard. And if supplies were cut off from the center, they would need much heavier shipments and help from overseas, which obviously takes a while. It takes ships a while to arrive. And of course, it's difficult to supply everybody and distribute everything when there's no electricity, when there's no communications, there's total chaos, there's roving gangs, etc. I mean, look at this map of the Clinton archipelagos. The leftists are almost all crammed into a few tiny geographical areas, these big coastal cities. So if you want to look at some interesting information about how the center of the United States does not need anybody for anything, watch a video that I'll link in the description by a guy named Peter Zehan, who's a geopolitical expert who talks about this. So,
you know, guys, I'm going to try to find that video and place it in the description box as well, or at least the lecture itself. I know it's on YouTube somewhere, but I do need to go ahead and add this up here. Okay, let's just say you're in a position, if you're a liberal living in one of these cities and you live right there on the coast, and you can't get supplies in by truck. As I mentioned, I think in parts 1 and 2 both, truck travel to these areas is going to be non-existent. I mean, they're not going to go out there and sit on the bridges for a while. They're not going to waste their time driving through combat zones. They're not armed. You know, maybe the military might would do that, but even that right there becomes one hell of a struggle, especially a logistical nightmare. You got to think about something right quick. What if supplies are coming in from the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean? What if those supplies are coming in? You've still got a problem right there, because next thing you know, you have, let's just go ahead and say you have crowds of people probably fighting one another over the very, very few supplies they have. Remember, when he talked in the last episode about he said, I don't know why they said 10,000. I think they forgot another number of people who would actually die within the first year. I tend to think that maybe the number is closer to probably 1 million. You see, 1 million people are probably going to eat one another alive, meaning not literally, figuratively, then maybe literally. But the thing is, this right here, they're going to be fighting for every little ounce of stuff they get coming off a shipment, and not to mention the fact you got to wait a long time, because see, now you're getting it by ship. It's not like a boat from, let's say, it's not like a boat coming from Russia or China is going to arrive at its destination, which is the United States, in less than a few weeks. That's not how things work. Of course, liberals do believe that, because they believe that just everything is magical and that nobody actually grows it. I mean, go back and take a look at the Chaz Chop incident, where they were talking about growing flour, they were growing plants and stuff for food, but yet all the food, all their plants were still inside the actual casing, and they had it put on top and they had it marked. These people are absolutely insane. They stand no chance.
scorecard, the geography factor, big advantage to the right wing. All right, we're down to the last two big factors here. International involvement.
Really quick about geography. A lot of these libs would not want to go to geography, these areas out, these mountains and stuff anyways. I mean, remember, these are the same people who always protest on Columbus Day. I mean, I just don't see them doing it.
This is what this guy says. Russia has already publicly stated that it will support any rebellion in the United States against the establishment government and will send troops and aid to support the resistance. This is pretty self-explanatory. The last thing the government would need during a civil war is Russia breathing down its neck, but they would get exactly that. To supplement 2/3 of their own military leaving and civilians being trained by military elites, Spetsnaz would drop in and the resistance would get armor and air support from the only other nation on the planet that stands at.
Now, this right here, I don't believe. Okay, what Russia would do is that they would fight us on a different. This is what I was saying before. As I've said on multiple occasions in this video, this thing right here would come from the left. Russia would probably want to get involved, but not here in the United States itself. The most they would do is, well, they would send, unless it was an actual full-on invasion, they're not going to be supporting the right side. They're going to support whoever the hell they have to think they have a better chance of winning, which, by the way, does sound contradictory. I apologize. I didn't mean for it to come out that way. I think, if anything, Russia would try to use this as an opportunity to actually invade America itself. What I mean is that they would probably try to use this. They're telling you that they would support the right. No, they would not. They would more than likely support the left, who aligns not so much, who aligns more against the U.S. government. Because just remember, anything left center is far right to them. Now, I could see the argument. I'm just not seeing it right now, at least from my point of view. I can see the argument coming from somebody else to say, look, Putin is much more aligned to the U.S. right, much more aligned to conservatives. But I would not rely on Putin coming over here and helping out. I just wouldn't rely upon that. Look, let's just put it this way here. The war in Ukraine, I think of it, and my key phrase I've been using, which I stole from Sergil Simpson, is I think that the war in Ukraine is basically two turds fight to be king turtle on top of shit mountain. Basically, what I'm saying to you guys is that Putin is not exactly what we would call trustworthy in the circumstances. By the way, China's going to come up too. I do think that, if anything, I think that Russia and China would try to split the country up, China going to the West Coast, Russia going to the East Coast. And I think at the end of the day, their objective would be to just harm America. And as I said before, overseas involvement, our troops, our personnel are already over there in Europe. We'd probably be sending more to kind of protect against that. So I have a hard time seeing Russia getting involved at this moment in time. But I could see China, which will come up here shortly.
Decent chance of fighting us openly and winning. So I agree with the fact that Russia could very well supply armor and arms to the grassroots right wing. I think it's less likely that any foreign country would actually put boots on the ground in America with their own military, including Russia. Because if you think about it, the United States of America, the biggest purchasing power nation on earth, a lot of these economies all over the world are completely dependent or almost completely dependent on the U.S. economy to continue running. They're just going to want it to be over with as fast as possible so we can get back to business as usual and they can keep making money. So I'm not going to say there's a zero chance of boots on the ground, but I think it's less likely than what this analysis is saying. Some people,
if anything, now that I think about it, Russia would probably try to take advantage in the Middle East. By the way, if you're a Bible prophecy guy, you're probably looking at this and you're probably thinking to yourself, this verse sounds like Gog and Magog. By the way, the United States is clumped in with the merchants of Tarshish. However, there is one country that is not mentioned in that scenario. I'm not talking about Armageddon, I'm talking about the Gog and Magog invasion. There's one country that's not mentioned by ancestry. That country is China. Now, I've always envisioned that the United States and China would be the two countries that would be warring with one another, and that Russia would take advantage of the Middle East at that moment in time. They would use that to come in on the side of Iran to do that. I just figured I would throw that out there. What would be the most opportune time to do that? If something like a civil war occurred in the United States. That's basically where I'm getting at. And I may even do another video on this. Matter of fact, I did do a Gog and Magog invasion little mini-series, but it was kind of raw, and I think it needs to be refined. I may revisit that at a later date.
Also point out China might help the left. I think it's very unlikely they would put boots on the ground. They don't actually have that much international expansionary military capability, but they could very well supply the left wing with arms or finance or whatnot if it came to that. But again, their economy is almost completely dependent on American buying power. Some people also say, oh, NATO and the United Nations would send in troops. And some people say that as if it's some kind of a trump card for the left establishment. And I just have to laugh. I mean, NATO has a grand total of 400,000 forces. So they can't just all abandon their posts. And by the way, that reminds me of a good point I think I forgot to make about the U.S. military, which is a lot of the U.S. military is overseas. They're tied up in all sorts of stations. They can't just leave everything they're doing and drop everything and come back to America.
You also got to think about something else too with the military. Is a lot of these troops are not even combat arms MOS. I've said it on multiple occasions that what would probably happen is that National Guard units in certain states would get activated, but the overall total would probably be no more than a couple of 100,000. However, the other half of the active duty military would be sent overseas with the Marine Corps to secure U.S. assets overseas. What would probably happen is that you would get a force of, say, 700,000 total, 300,000 in support, 200,000 active, and another 200,000 on standby. That's not enough to quell an actual force. Okay, it's not exactly enough to quell a force of what could be anywhere between. My guess would be anywhere, and I know he counts every single gunner, but in my opinion, an overall force somewhere between, I don't know, maybe a 2.5 to 3.5 to maybe even 10 million total if you count militiamen personnel. Like I said, and I've said this on multiple occasions, this right here would come from the left. What would probably happen, at least the scenario that I've always envisioned, is that it would be strictly designed, strictly held to the cities through civil unrest, and the military would be called in to fix it. Half, of course, here, and then the other half, you have a certain portion basically sitting on the side just in case something else occurred. Now, obviously, some Marine Corps units would still be here, some Special Forces units would be here, but for the most part, a good portion of our military is going overseas to secure those assets, and a lot of it's going to the cities to secure the left-wing rioters and the left-wing chaos. I tend to think of it like this right here. Have you guys ever read the comic Batman No Man's Land, that whole series? I mean, I'm a bit of a comic book nerd. And that comic book series, I think, outlined exactly what would happen. Imagine every single city in America, which, by the way, are ran by leftists and Democrats. Imagine every single one of them being so crime-ridden, so supply-ridden, that, they end up turning into actual crap holes in war zones. That's how I've always kind of sort of envisioned it going. Now, guys, we're going to try to get to about the 40-minute mark here, and then we're probably going to close the rest of it out tomorrow, or I'll finish making it tomorrow. But let's go ahead and run this out.
That takes a lot of the military out of the picture as well. And all these NATO forces can't just abandon their posts and fly over to the United States to do whatever. And if you look at the United Nations, they've only got 90,000 peacekeeping forces and 10,000 UN police. And those people can't all abandon their posts either. So these are very small numbers here in the grand scheme, especially when we remember how huge America is. You've got 50 million, at the very least 35 million grassroots right-wing men. That's just the men alone in America that would be at the very least sympathetic to the revolution, if not outright willing to act. So NATO and the UN, I can see the left establishment trying to bring them in, but it's not going to be a huge factor. And again, if you look at NATO, they're not going to be keen to drop all their defenses and send all their troops over here, while Big Daddy USA, who they're relying on almost totally to defend them, is in turmoil. They're not going to take their troops, which is the only thing they have defending them if the United States is distracted, and send them over to the United States. I mean, maybe they would, but they'd be leaving themselves completely and totally defenseless. So they're not going to be able to send that many people over to America because they got to defend themselves too. And then also, and this is why I think that any involvement by a foreign nation's army is unlikely, is that any boots on the ground involvement by a foreign army would be considered a violation of the post-war consensus on borders, that we don't invade each other militarily. And the purpose of this consensus is obviously to avoid another world war. And it would be a violation of the Westphalian sovereignty, which is the idea that nation states are responsible for factions and conflicts within their own borders. Now, it's not totally unheard of for these norms to be violated, but for outside nations to violate them and invade the most powerful nation in the world, that has nukes, by the way, is quite unlikely in my opinion. So let's go to our scorecard: help from overseas, or overseas military, financial, arms help. On this factor, I think it's a tie. If the conflict lasted long enough, Russia or others might aid the right wing with arms and supplies. China, NATO, the UN might aid the left wing with arms or supplies. But overall, it's going to be basically a tie probably, and not enough on either side probably to completely turn the tide toward one side or the other.
All right, guys. The last part of this video is mostly about PR. Now, guys, that's going to be the largest part of the video. Is going to be part 4. Part 2 ended up being about 30 minutes long. This one right here, I think, is about 20, 25 minutes. I'm kind of doing it raw. We're always going to come back to this, and I'm going to go ahead and work on part 4 probably tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon. It'll be out on Saturday, and of course, I'll have my post analysis out on Sunday. We're going to go ahead and hold it right there for right now tonight, and then I'm going to go ahead and come on back tomorrow night and probably go ahead and finish it off. It's going to be the largest portion. Guys, with that there being said, make sure you guys hit that like button. Make sure you guys subscribe. Make sure you guys share the video. Also, at the same time, leave a comment in the comment section. And I will see you next time.